I agree with, I think Tom Cotton is saying this now, a Republican, and I think Andrew Yang has said this repeatedly, and I think everybody in the middle is starting to say, maybe UBI, universal basic income, might not make sense as an ongoing thing, but boy, does it make sense now. As one of the people who's going to be stuck with the problem of paying off the national debt, I don't see a better reason to run up the debt. Maybe I've never seen a better reason to run up the debt than what we have right now. So if you say to me, Scott, the debt's already an emergency, we owe however many trillions, we can't add 2 more trillion to that, to which I say, compared to what? Compared to what? I mean, I'm one of the people who's going to have to pay off that debt, right? Because I have money. It's not poor people who pay off debts. It's people with money. And I'm here to tell you, I'm okay with universal basic income. People got to eat. You got to keep the lights on, right? Well, the lights will stay on. But, people who are temporarily without a paycheck, they still need to go to the grocery store or order their online groceries. And I don't think, for me, that shouldn't be even a discussion. Because unless we have another way to solve that specific problem of getting those people who are staying at home, a paycheck, if somebody doesn't have a better answer, and I haven't heard of one, we should do that today. I don't know why Congress hasn't already done that. It feels like a today problem, not next week.
Yeah, it's really interesting you bring this up. Was it yesterday or the day before? I got in an Uber here in New York City. And when I got in, the gentleman had on medical gloves, the driver, and he had a N95 mask on. And next to him on the console, he had a bunch of hand sanitizer and wipes. And we just started talking, and I basically said, how's it going? Is demand going down? Do you think Uber will kind of shut down and Lyft shut down, et cetera? And he said something really interesting. He goes, a couple people have gotten in and asked me, why am I still driving? Obviously, given the fact that I'm worried about the virus, given all the kind of personal protective equipment. And he said, and I keep reminding them, I still have bills to pay. I still have to feed my family. I still have rent to pay, right? No one's going to kind of give me any help. And so I'm going to keep driving until they tell me to get off the road. And I thought it was, just kind of the perfect example of somebody who that's what he has to do, right? That's his living, and he's going to keep doing it until either they tell him to get off the road or he's got to, somehow get through this, kind of this tough time.
Yeah, people are going to be making a lot of tough decisions. One thing that might be a little ray of hope is that the restaurants are going to become delivery kitchens, basically. And the existing delivery people presumably are maxed out because, I used food delivery 4 times yesterday. Once was a supermarket order that we put in a week ago. It just took a week to get here. And 3 times I told my crew here that they could just use as much DoorDash as they want, as long as they use obviously it's local restaurants. It's just to support the local restaurants. So I basically took the cap off for my family. It's like, you're hungry? I don't need to be with you. I don't need to, you don't need to ask me. If you're hungry, go support a restaurant by going to your computer and push the buttons, get a tip to the delivery guy. So I think you're going to see Uber people becoming food and product delivery people on top of whatever little bit of human cargo they have. So that could help a little.
For sure. And then in terms of the UBI, I've got this friend, Travis Kling, who always says that quantitative easing is just UBI for rich people, right? And kind of the idea that if we're going to, quote unquote, bail people out, or we're going to inject kind of this liquidity into the Wall Street finance world, is there really that big of a difference between handing that money directly to people? And I think you get into some semantics between, UBI versus MMT, and people have different versions of this. But at the end of the day, it's the concept of the government getting money to individuals so that they can put that money in their pocket and hopefully stimulate that economic activity.
Do you mind if I curse?
You're free to do whatever you want.
So you've been warned if you're listening. The idea of doing any kind of a trickle down approach in this emergency is batshit fucking crazy, and we should just cut it out. Like, unless there's some economist who's going to disagree with me, I don't think so. You got people who need a check today so they can buy some food, or whatever they need to buy. I think UBI, we should be past the argument on that. At least for the temporary version. The permanent one, I think, is out of the question at the moment. But we can trial it, see what happens in the emergency. Maybe we learn something also, although it's a unique situation. So probably we wouldn't learn what we need to learn about a normal situation. But I'm watching Congress, and I'm saying, I'm very forgiving about the issue of when did you start, because everything could have been done sooner. But I don't think there's a pushback on this basic idea that you can't wait for it to trickle down. And I'm real unhappy if there's any politician saying something like that, be they Republican or be they Democrat. You're not qualified for your job if you're talking about waiting for it to trickle down and hope the business is kind to its employees and stuff like that. No, just give them the check. Give it to them right now. Today is the day. It's in an emergency. We're operating under what I call TV time. For people who work on live TV, if you've ever been in that situation, I've been in it a lot, waiting for the countdown. And you'll be chatting with the host, and there'll be 7 seconds until airtime. And the host will turn to me and start a conversation. And I'll be sitting there, the first times it happened to me, I'm like, don't you realize there are only 7 seconds? You can't start a conversation. What are we going to do in 7 seconds? And then you realize that they do the thing, you respond, you go back and forth, the light goes on, they look at the camera, and boom, it's game time. So there's this weird sense of compressed time in the live TV world that we need to take to Congress. Because, without exaggeration, the UBI thing should be done today. And I don't mean that hyperbolically. I mean, actually, Congress should get together and say, all right, let's just do this thing because we know we got to do it sooner or later. Let's just approve this thing. That's a today thing. They should be on TV time.
Yeah, and I don't remember all of the details, but I think it was in 2008 under George Bush. I can't remember if it was a tax credit or an actual check, but as part of the financial crisis, I think there's like a $450 thing. It wasn't exactly UBI, but it's not like this has never happened before. And to your point about this kind of being a bipartisan thing at this point, I saw a bunch of headlines yesterday that Mitt Romney is even supporting, kind of $1,000 check for individuals, and there was a lot of kind of right. Kind of excitement that Mitt Romney is saying this.
Yeah, we've got AOC, Andrew Yang, Mitt Romney. I think Tom Cotton is somewhere in that neighborhood. I'm there. It's the whole spectrum. If you can't get that done today, when people in the entire spectrum agree on it, I got some questions about Congress. That's a today thing. I hate to harp on that, but it's not a tomorrow thing.
Yeah, and so that brings me to let's get away from the individuals and kind of the UBI. Now what we're seeing is a lot of industries going to the government and saying, hey, we need assistance, we need bailouts, kind of a whole spectrum of how people are articulating what they're asking for. But essentially what they're asking for are bailouts, and whether it's the airlines or other industries. And I think what's quickly becoming a somewhat controversial debate is a lot of these companies that are asking for help are also companies that had very high percentage of their free cash flow devoted to stock buybacks. So any ideas kind of around how you evaluate the bailouts of certain industries, and kind of how do we pick which ones get help, which ones don't? And then also, does the stock buyback stuff play into any of this in your opinion, or is that kind of a separate issue and shouldn't enter the discussion?
Well, you're raising the question of what's fair in a sense, as opposed to what is possible. It's probably possible to bail out these industries, given running up our debt, but we know we can do that. So it's possible, but is it fair? That's really the question people are going to ask. And let me give you my emergency crisis answer to the question of, is it fair? Don't care. Don't bother me with that. The last thing I'm going to even engage with you is on a question of fairness during an emergency. And I had to have this conversation yesterday with somebody not Christina, but somebody in my life, where I had to explain that fairness is just nothing that will have any weight. Don't tell me that argument. Don't tell me what's fair. Don't want to hear it. We're in a position of you have to do what you have to do. So it's a greater good situation. And if the greater good is that we have a airline that goes back to health, we just got to do that. All right. That's not oh, it's so unfair. The stockholders of the airlines, got some free cash. Don't care. I'm not even going to have that conversation with you. The conversation is airlines, yes, or airlines, no. If it comes down to that, it's going to be airlines, yes. And don't tell me anything else. Just be quiet. Take your feelings about the fairness. Do whatever you need to do to process them, but they're not part of the decision. That's ordinary world. In ordinary world, we'll talk about fairness. In emergency world, it's not a thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you kind of position it that way of, fairness doesn't enter the equation, because I think that's a pretty accurate way to evaluate it. The other thing that I've heard people argue is what I'll call more kind of the free market capitalism, which is, hey, if they've been bad allocators of capital, does that then mean that we should encourage more competition? Whether that is kind of in the extreme of let some companies fail and they'll get replaced by new challengers, or actually should we divert resources to help new challengers enter the market? How do you think about that balance between, maybe not bailing out industries versus letting them completely fail, versus bail out and then actually create a new paradigm or a new world for that industry moving forward, whether that's new regulatory issues or encouraging competition?
Yeah, I think that conflates the long-term strategy with the short-term. The short-term is we can't have no airline travel. The long-term is how do you do it in the best possible way? And I think it's a mistake to mix those. We're in an emergency situation. How do we get back to something close to business as normal? That's the only thing I care about. If you're also trying to complicate that by, let's not let this crisis go to waste. Maybe we could change some things and change the industry and tweak it. Well, every time you add complexity, you're slowing things down. You're adding a new point of failure, giving somebody else a reason to say no to what they should be saying yes to. So this is no time to get clever, and it's at least in that way, in terms of adding complications and planning for something that, maybe that would be better in some way. It's just not the time for that. But yes, maybe we learn something from this that once we're past the danger zone, we can apply it in the future. But I don't want to look back. Don't want to focus about what the airlines did in the past. Don't want to talk about fairness. Want to look at the future and the greater good. Focus on that, not the past, not fairness.
Yeah, you've got a very kind of, we're in an emergency, let's solve the emergency, I think, viewpoint, which frankly is not commonly held by a majority of people. So it's kind of refreshing to hear that.